There's been a cultural shift happening in America over the past few years, and we all know it. Sealed by the re-election of Donald Trump, many are quickly declaring the death of DEI.
DEI is dead.
Are you sure about that?
In his first day in office, Trump signed an executive order that mandated the termination of all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs within the federal government. Subsequent EOs also attacked DEI initiatives and federal contractors, and opened up private sector companies to investigation by the Attorney General. As a result of these political and cultural shifts, major corporate companies have been easing up on their DEI programs, and in-your-face virtue signaling on social media. Ah, yes.
Diversity.
In my corporate job, I used to get weekly DEI emails, which stopped almost immediately after Trump's inauguration. So much for diversity being a core value, right guys?
Got it!
Federally funded universities, this circle jerk factories of leftism, have also relaxed or downright shut down their DEI programs. Even the S&P Global has recently withdrawn social governance scores from its credit ratings. But I'm not quite convinced that we've seen the last of DEI. In fact, in this video, I'll explain why I think DEI will never die. Welcome everybody to The Body Aesthetic. My name is Matthew, and to make my point about DEI, first we're going to be talking about globalism. I think we all have an idea of what globalism is, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to define globalism as an ideology that seeks to establish global, universal systems. Universal systems that allow the free exchange and flow of people, value, culture, ideas between geographies across the globe. The internet is an obvious example of a digital global system that connects people across the world. Now, globalism is not just a modern phenomenon. It has existed in some form or another throughout history, as we'll discuss later. But true worldwide globalization is now more possible than ever with modern technology. Inventions like the car and the plane have transformed how we think about time and space in a powerful way. In the past, travel by land and sea over hundreds of miles would take like months, and it was extremely risky. Now we can hop on a plane and go to the other end of the entire planet in less than a day's time, with a very low risk of death. It's actually insane to think about.
New York to California in 6 hours. That used to take 30 years to do that. And a bunch of you would die on the way there. You get shot in the neck with an arrow and you go, oh, and fall down. And the other passengers would just bury you and put a stick there with your hat on it and keep walking. Now you watch an Adam Sandler movie and you take a big runny dump and you're there.
Anyways, these technologies, along with the internet, have created a connected worldwide infrastructure that globalism can build upon. But the world today is still full of nations with individual identities, beliefs, values, and goals. And many times these national identities, of course, clash. Because of the interconnected nature of globalism, these clashes impact the stability of global systems, namely economic systems. And some people really hate it when they miss out on those shekels. Oy vey. See, there's this pesky thing called nationalism that has a tendency to get in the way of globalist interests. Globalism sees nationalism as a threat towards the progression of its goals. Because nationalism, of course, is predicated on elevating and promoting the interests of one particular nation above the rest. And when stuck on a small planet with limited resources, nationalism inevitably leads to war, affecting global stability. Also, nationalistic countries tend to keep resources to themselves for the benefit of their own people. And again, some people really hate missing out on all those shekels. So how do good little globalists overcome this obstacle? Well, they do so by simply dismantling nationalism, piece by piece. And this is where we get into why I don't think DEI is dead. But before we get into that, every YouTube guru tells me I need to call to action my videos, so subscribe now. And if you don't, I just have one question for you.
Why are you gay?
Alright, back to it. You see, nationalism is predicated on national unity, and unity requires a common identity. The national identity of a country can be defined by its majority ethnicity, culture, and religion. Sometimes this can be difficult to do, especially for empires that span far and wide and have conquered and incorporated many different peoples, ethnicities, and religions. But a national identity can really be defined by any common shared set of values. As an example, just think about the United States and how the pioneering American identity and ideals served in unifying a country full of immigrants. The identity of freedom, opportunity, and equality. Now that identity doesn't really exist anymore, but that's a whole nother video. The point is that the American identity served to unify people from all over the world who held different cultural, religious, and political beliefs. So to dismantle nationalism, globalism must first start with national identity. If a nation is unified by a shared set of values, A globalist must convince the people to reject those values. But what is a globalist to do if a nation's identity arises from a commonly shared ethnicity, culture, and religion? Well, simply dilute it with diversity. No, seriously, think about it. Nationalistic ideology cannot survive in a country that is split by diverse cultures, beliefs, religions, and ideals. Because if there's no majority of one particular people that share common values through ethnicity and culture, and the people reject the national values established by the country, then there's no commonality to establish a group identity. And that's why we're seeing the US fractionate in real time. The globalists have essentially succeeded in dismantling any kind of foundation that American nationalism can be built upon. And they seek to do the same in all of the world's most powerful nations. Because once the most influential nations succumb to global interests over national ones, then the rest of the world will have to follow suit, providing globalists with the framework they need to establish a new nation, a new sovereignty that spans the globe. A sovereignty with a global identity, a global economy, global political system fueled by a global citizen. What is a global citizen? Well, I'm glad you asked. A global citizen is an ethnically, culturally, and even sexually nondescript being with no defining characteristics that would make one different. A blended, homogenized paste of a person that exists as part of a global corporate uniculture, to act solely as a battery to be sucked dry by the system. An individual who transcends national, ethnic, cultural, or sexual boundaries because, well, those boundaries no longer exist. A gray, non-binary blob that exists only to fuel consumerism. Literally the Greendale human being from Community.
Brother, what's that? What's that, brother?
Now this is where DEI makes its greatest impact. DEI and the push for multiculturalism, homo and transsexual identity, and open borders is the mechanism to develop this global citizen. I mean, just look at this image right here. This image compares screenshots from 4 separate Netflix shows. If there was ever an image to pictorially represent Globo Homo, this is it right here. This is maximum diversity. Yet why does each show look exactly the same? Partly because these shows are money laundering schemes, and despite their multi-million-dollar budgets, apparently none of it went to costume design. But a bigger part is the push for, quote, equal representation for everyone. Ironically, the pursuit of diversity just makes everything look the same in the end. It's like taking a bunch of fruit, oranges, blueberries, kiwi, papaya, I don't know, all these different unique fruits with their own colors, tastes, and qualities, and then stuffing them all in a blender to make a blended, homogenized paste. No more uniqueness of each individual fruit. It's all been assimilated into one DEI blend, and that's exactly what's happening to people and culture in real time. Hey, it's me again. Have you subscribed yet? Because if not,
You ugly.
So how do we make sense of all this? Remember when I said globalism has existed in some form throughout history? Well, let's see what the past can teach us about globalism. Humans wrote about globalism as early as the 5th century BC, 2,500 years ago. People were talking about this shit. There truly is nothing new under the sun, folks. I mean, globalism has been written about in the most accessible ancient book in history. I'm talking about the Bible. Many people say that the Tower of Babel is a story made up by primitive humans to explain the existence of different languages. And all I'm going to say about that is we have a special bus for those people. The Tower of Babel story is not an origin story of languages. It's actually a cautionary tale against globalism, or more specifically, against man's hubris in seeking ultimate control through the centralization of power. Okay, pause. Allow me to unpack that and explain. The Tower of Babel story is an image of a united humanity using technology to escape chaos and death, essentially using total control to brute force our way to paradise. Just think about what a tower is for a moment. It's an object made up of a vast amount of materials and resources, gathered from far and wide, then collected and concentrated in a small area, that stacks on itself, increasing its reach ever upward. Now I want you to imagine the most ginormous tower you can possibly imagine, and think about the logistics of what it would take to build such a structure. The amount of manpower, the amount of labor, sweat, and blood, the vast amount of material needed to construct it, the systems that would need to be in place in order to mine and gather the raw materials, then the systems necessary to process the raw material into workable building blocks, then the supply chain of processing and transporting all that material from all over disparate lands into one place. That kind of massive structure requires a vast network and system of control in order to be built, to fuel itself and ensure its survival, so to speak. an infinitely hungry structure that consumes men and matter in order to grow towards the heavens, escaping the floodwaters below. See, that was part of the point of the tower. I'm sure you all remember something about a flood that drowned the world, Noah's Ark, rainbows and all that. The building of the Tower of Babel occurs after the flood, so it's still pretty fresh on everyone's mind. The flood is death, and water in general in the ancient world is used symbolically to represent chaos. In the story, it is said that the whole earth had, quote, one language and one speech. In other words, the world was united under global culture. And this global culture came together to build this centralized, all-consuming system of control to eliminate death and suffering and achieve paradise, heaven, and utopia. Does that sound familiar? Are you beginning to see the picture? If you ever wondered what's the deal with transhumanism, the World Economic Forum, digital IDs, and Palantir and all that, and why so many powerful people are so obsessed with these things, this is it. So you see, the globalists that are seeking to, quote, propel humanity forward by establishing a one-world sovereignty, a new world order, are driven by the same thing that drove ancient humanity to build the Tower of Babel. It's the same story being repeated again. But what does all this have to do with DEI? Well, as I explained earlier, DEI is the mechanism to bring about the model global citizen, which is the fuel for the New World Order, the building block of the Tower. The Tower being a global system that uses surveillance and totalitarian control to attempt to eliminate all danger, risk, and death, in defiance of nature, in defiance of God. And this prideful endeavor is a tendency of fallen man that has been happening in ages past, is happening now, and will happen in the future. And that is why DEI will never die.
You are gay.